I've always liked working the night shift. It's quiet, predictable in its own way. Most people hate the stillness of the early hours, but I've grown to find a kind of peace in it. Fewer distractions, no traffic, and when I drive home, the streets are empty. Just me, my headlights, and the distant hum of a sleeping city. My neighborhood is usually calm at night too. Streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalks and most of the houses are dark by midnight. That's why it stood out so much the first time I noticed the car. It was parked directly across the street from my house. Black sedan, tinted windows. Nothing unusual about it at first glance except that it was just sitting there. Engine off, lights out, no movement inside, just parked. I brushed it off the first time. Maybe someone visiting a neighbor. Maybe a couple having a late-night argument. It's not my business. I went inside, locked the door, and forgot about it. But the next night, it was there again. Same car, same spot, same silence. That uneasy feeling crept in, the kind that whispers before it screams. I tried not to dwell on it. Told myself it was a coincidence that repeated itself again the next night, and the next. By the fourth night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something wasn't right. I started checking the window as soon as I got home. Every time the car was there. No one got in, no one got out, no lights, no motion, just the outline of a vehicle, waiting. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That a car parked legally in a public space made me uncomfortable? That I had a feeling? I didn't want to sound paranoid. I wasn't even sure I wasn't being paranoid, but I started turning the porch light on, then leaving more indoor lights lit. I even took a longer route home a few times just to see if anyone followed. Nothing changed. The car stayed, silent, still, watching. By the end of the first week, the car had become a fixture. It didn't show up every night, but often enough that I started to dread pulling into my driveway. I'd slow down before turning the corner, hoping that maybe this time it wouldn't be there. But most nights it was. I started documenting it. Photos from my window, notes on the times it arrived and left if it ever did. Some nights I'd wake up in the middle of a dreamless sleep just to check if it was still there. And it always was, sitting like a shadow that refused to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside, watching. I stared through the blinds for minutes at a time, trying to detect any movement, a shift, a silhouette. But there was nothing. Just the soft outline of a dark vehicle and a growing knot in my stomach. One night I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, unable to sleep. At around 3:30 a.m. I thought I saw the shape of a head in the driver's seat. I blinked hard. The windshield was too dark to be sure, but the figure didn't move. I watched for 15 minutes. Nothing. That's when I started to change. I became more withdrawn, jumpy. I stopped inviting friends over. I rarely turned off the lights at night. I even bought blackout curtains. Not to keep light out, but to keep prying eyes from looking in. I installed a small security camera on my front porch. Not because I thought it would catch anything useful, but because I needed to feel like I had some kind of control. I didn't know what was happening. I only knew this wasn't normal. And deep down, I felt it was building toward something. Something I wouldn't be able to ignore for much longer. It was a Sunday night when things escalated. I got home a little earlier than usual and decided to go for a short walk. The air was cool, the streets damp from a light drizzle earlier. I walked through my neighborhood, just a few blocks to clear my mind. When I turned the corner to come back, I saw the black car, parked in the same spot. I felt a familiar chill run through me. I didn't stop. I just kept walking straight past it. I didn't dare look directly at it, but I could feel its presence, heavy, watching. When I got home, I turned off the porch light for once, sat in the dark. Maybe whoever was inside would think I wasn't there. That's when I got the notification. Motion detected, bedroom camera. I stared at my phone, confused. Bedroom camera? I had installed cameras outside, one at the porch and one facing the backyard, but not inside. Unless I tapped into the feed. The screen lit up, showing a grainy shot of my bedroom, slightly angled from the doorway. And then something moved. A dark blur crossed the room just for a second. Quick but unmistakable. A person. Inside my house. I froze. My mind went blank. Heart pounding, hands shaking. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How was there a camera in my room? And who was walking through it? I dropped the phone, grabbed my keys, and ran out the front door barefoot. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station 3 blocks down. I locked myself in the bathroom and called 911. The dispatcher kept me calm as I described what I'd seen. They said officers were already en route. I gave them my address, hung up, and waited. The entire time, all I could think about was one question. How long had someone been inside my home? The police arrived in under 10 minutes. I met them outside, still barefoot, still shaking. I explained what I'd seen, how I'd gotten the motion alert, how I didn't have an indoor camera, how someone had to have installed it without me knowing. They looked at me the way people do when they're not sure if you're telling the truth or just spiraling. But to their credit, they didn't waste time. 2 officers entered my house with weapons drawn while another stayed outside with me, asking questions. I kept glancing back toward the street, expecting the black car to still be there. But it was gone. Inside, they swept room by room. I watched through the open front door, waiting for something, anything. After what felt like forever, one of the officers returned. "There's no one inside," he said. "But someone's definitely been here." Drawers were open in my bedroom. My closet was disturbed. Clothes shifted, boxes moved. The attic hatch in the hallway was slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it in months. They asked if I had any friends who might have a key. I didn't. No one had access to my place. They didn't find any signs of forced entry, which meant whoever had been there either picked the lock or had been inside before I even got home. They secured the house and advised me to stay somewhere else for the night. I agreed immediately. They took the footage from the mysterious camera, trying to trace its signal. It hadn't been connected to my network. It was transmitting wirelessly to another device. Whoever had set it up wasn't just inside my house, they were watching me. It didn't take long for the police to connect the dots. 3 days later, they called me back in. They had arrested a man found loitering behind a closed hardware store in the middle of the night. He matched the vague silhouette from the bedroom footage. But that wasn't what got him caught. He had a bag with him. Inside, duct tape, gloves, a hunting knife, and a stack of photographs. All of them were of me. Coming and going from work, sitting on my porch, walking around my neighborhood, each one labeled with dates and times. Notes on my routine, when I left, when I came home, even which nights I seemed most tired. But the worst part wasn't the photos. It was the notebook. He had written entire pages about me, about my patterns, about waiting for the right time. It wasn't just surveillance, it was obsession. He'd broken into my house more than once. He had mapped the layout. He had cataloged my belongings. He had even slept in my guest bedroom on nights I was at work. He'd been living inside my life like a parasite, quiet, calculated, patient. I moved out the next week, changed my number, got a different car, new locks. I even left my job. Anything to erase the version of myself he had tracked. But sometimes, when I walk through a parking lot, I still check the corners for a black sedan. Not because I think he's back, he's in custody, but because now I know what it feels like when danger doesn't knock on your door. It waits outside. It was the kind of night that makes you second-guess your decisions. Heavy rain hammered the windshield, and the wipers barely kept up. I had already made a few decent fares that evening, but something told me to keep going. Bills had piled up, and weekends were usually good for tips even in weather like this, especially in weather like this. My phone buzzed with a new request. Pickup was about 15 minutes out, right at the edge of town, near the tree line where streetlights start to disappear and dirt roads take over. I hesitated. The area was known for being isolated, but something about it tugged at me. Maybe it was the fare. Maybe it was the way the storm made everything else seem distant, unreal. I accepted the ride and turned down the winding road. The drive was slow. Branches swayed violently over the road, and the occasional flash of lightning painted the landscape in sharp, terrifying detail. My GPS rerouted twice due to flooding. Still, I made it. When I arrived, no one was there. Just a figure in the shadows, standing under a large pine tree barely visible. I rolled down the window slightly and called out, "You order a ride?" The figure nodded once and walked toward the car. I should have driven away. He slid into the back seat without a word. The cabin light flickered as the door closed. I glanced at the mirror. He was soaked, hood pulled low over his face. No greeting, no destination. Where to?" I asked. He didn't respond at first. Then, in a flat voice, he said, "Just drive for now. I'll tell you when to stop." My stomach tightened. I've had my share of weird passengers. Drunk ones, silent ones, angry ones. But this felt different. Off. Like I had stepped into someone else's story and didn't know my role yet. We drove in silence. Every now and then I looked at him through the mirror. He didn't move, didn't fidget, just stared out the window. I couldn't even tell if his eyes were open or shut. After about 10 minutes, he leaned forward, close enough that I could smell damp earth and something metallic like rust. "Take the next left," he whispered. It led to an unpaved road surrounded by trees. The deeper we went, the more the GPS lost its grip. I was driving blind, trusting a stranger who barely spoke. My gut screamed at me to turn around. But I didn't. I kept going. Eventually, he sat back again and said, "Here." I stopped the car. And in the silence that followed, the storm suddenly felt very far away. We were in the middle of nowhere. No houses, no lights, just trees and mud and the kind of darkness that feels alive. "Here?" I repeated. He didn't answer. He opened the door and stepped out, his shoes sinking slightly into the soaked ground. I watched through the mirror, waiting for him to walk away, but he didn't. He stood there for a moment, then turned to face me. I couldn't see his expression, but his body was completely still. "Thanks," he said, voice hollow. And then he backed into the trees. No flashlight, no umbrella, no trail, just vanished into the forest like he'd done it 100 times before. I stayed frozen for a moment, my brain trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe he lived in a cabin nearby. Maybe he was meeting someone. Maybe this was normal, but nothing about it felt normal. I marked the ride as complete, and as soon as I had a signal again, I drove straight home. I didn't pick up another passenger that night. I couldn't. That silent figure disappearing into the woods replayed in my head over and over, and the more I thought about it, the less it felt like a memory and more like a warning I hadn't understood yet. The next morning, I tried to forget about it. I told myself I was being dramatic. Weird doesn't mean dangerous. Silent doesn't mean evil. But the image lingered. The way he vanished into the woods, the way he barely spoke, the way he waited under the tree like he had always been there. I decided to report it, just to be safe. At the local precinct, I explained the ride in detail. The officer taking notes didn't seem particularly concerned, but he humored me. I gave the time, the pickup location, even the route we'd taken, and the exact coordinates where I dropped him off. He raised an eyebrow. "You know someone went missing out there a few months ago, right?" I didn't. He pulled up a case file. A local hiker, 24 years old, vanished near the same area. No phone activity, no confirmed sightings, just gone. "That spot you dropped the guy off," he said. "It's about a mile from where they found the hiker's backpack." Suddenly, the pieces didn't just feel strange, they felt connected. I left the station with a feeling that something larger was at play, something I had narrowly brushed against without ever truly seeing it. I expected a follow-up call, an investigation, a knock on the door asking for more details, but nothing came. The police never contacted me again. I reached out once, just to ask if anything new had surfaced. They said they were still reviewing the information but had found no matches for the passenger AS description. No leads, no fingerprints, no sightings. It was like he'd never existed. And as for the hiker, still missing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in that spot just a little longer. If I'd followed him into the trees, if I'd asked one more question. But I didn't. And maybe that's why I'm still here to tell this story. I don't pick up passengers that far out anymore. I don't drive during storms. And I never ever accept a ride request without a destination. Some people call it paranoia. I call it memory. A memory of a man who entered my car from the edge of nowhere and walked straight back into it. I came home from work one night and noticed deep impressions in the gravel leading into my driveway. At first I thought they were mine, but the pattern didn't match. My car was parked exactly where it always was, but these tracks swerved slightly, like someone had backed in, paused, then turned out again. I crouched down, curious. The prints were fresh. Mud had dried along the edges. Someone had been here, recently. Still, it wasn't enough to raise alarm. Delivery drivers sometimes turn around in my driveway. No big deal. But then I saw the smear. Just next to the front steps, on the white part of the siding, there was a streak of something dark. Mud, maybe. A dragging motion, like a boot or a hand brushed against it. I couldn't be sure. I wiped it clean and didn't think much more of it. That was a mistake. A few days later, I noticed the latch on the backyard gate was broken. Again, I reasoned it away. Wind, maybe, or an animal. I fixed it and moved on. But something had shifted. The house felt less like mine. You know when you walk into a room and feel like someone else has just left it? That's how it felt every time I stepped through the front door, like I was always arriving just a little too late. It wasn't long before the sound started. It began with subtle things, wood creaking in places that didn't usually creak, doors shifting slightly as if pushed by air that wasn't moving. I chalked it up to temperature changes. Houses settle. It happens. But then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the front door. I looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. I froze. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. I waited, ears straining in the silence. Another knock. Same rhythm. Then nothing. When I finally peeked out the window, the porch was empty. No car in the street, no footsteps in the dew-covered walkway. Nothing. I told myself maybe it was a prank. Maybe I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation can do strange things to the mind. I left the porch light on that night and double-checked every lock in the house. But the next night it happened again. Same time, same knock, same emptiness outside. This time I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the hallway, lights off, waiting with my phone in hand, ready to call the police. But the knock didn't come. And somehow, that was worse. Because it meant whoever it was knew I was waiting. 2 nights later, I fell asleep on the couch. I hadn't meant to, it just happened. Stress, fatigue, the constant anxiety of being on alert. I woke to the sound of static. The TV was on. Loud white noise filled the room, flickering light casting harsh shadows across the walls. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked for the remote. It wasn't there. I checked under the couch cushions, on the coffee table, on the floor. Nothing. Then I remembered the guest room. I hadn't used it in weeks, had no reason to. But a creeping feeling pulled me toward it, like something unseen had already made the decision for me. I opened the door slowly. The room was dark, untouched, except for one thing: the remote, sitting on the bed, right in the center, as if placed there intentionally. My chest tightened. I didn't put it there. I hadn't been in that room. No one had. Or so I thought. I backed away slowly, grabbed my phone, and called the police again. This time, I didn't wait for things to get worse. By the time the officers arrived, I was outside, sitting on the curb with my bag and keys in hand. I didn't want to go back in. I didn't want to explain anymore. I just wanted someone else to see it, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. They searched the house thoroughly. Same story as before. No one inside, no signs of forced entry. But the guest room window had been unlocked, just slightly, barely enough to notice unless you were looking for it. I was certain I hadn't opened it. One of the officers looked at me and said gently, You did the right thing calling us. It felt strange to hear that, like permission to trust myself again. I packed a bag that night and stayed with a friend. I didn't go back for days. When I did, it was only to meet with a private security company to install new locks, sensors, and cameras, this time inside. I thought it would bring peace of mind, but sometimes, safety isn't a system, it's a feeling. And once that's broken, it's hard to repair. A week later, the final report came in. The police had found footprints, not outside, inside. Small prints, barefoot, tracked faintly across the hardwood floor from the guest room to the hallway, and then nothing. They stopped abruptly, mid-step, as if the person had vanished into the wall. There was no explanation. No DNA. No prints on the windows or doorknobs. No record of anyone nearby. But whoever it was had been inside the house for hours, watching, waiting, moving when I didn't, hiding when I did. The officers believed he may have been living in the attic. The entrance was hidden in the hallway closet, a place I rarely opened. Dust marks on the shelf above suggested someone had used it to climb. They found a blanket, a half-eaten granola bar, and a small notebook. Inside were rough sketches of the floor plan, notes like, "good hiding spot," and "moves to kitchen at 2 a.m. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random, this was calculated. I moved out within days. New city, new apartment, new locks. But I still check closets before I sleep. Still feel watched sometimes. Because once someone breaks into your home, they don't always leave through the front door.